She left on a Thursday afternoon, pulling a rollerboard through a door she didn't look back at. Andre Hayes stood in the doorway of the apartment that was already too quiet and watched the parking lot until her brake lights disappeared at the corner. Maya was asleep in the back room, 3 years old and unaware that the geometry of her life had just changed permanently, and Andre stayed very still in the doorframe for a long time. Because if he moved, he would have to decide what to do next, and he didn't know yet what that was. He went to check on Maya. She was curled around a stuffed rabbit, one sock half off. He sewed the sock back up. He stood beside her small bed in the low light and made the same calculation every person makes in that particular moment. Whether the weight of the night ahead was something survivable, it was. He knew it was. The knowing didn't make it lighter, but it was enough. He had been a father for 3 years. He was about to become a father in the fuller sense. The sense that meant both parents, both sets of anxieties, both voices in the dark when the fever came, both hands in the morning when the school bag couldn't be found. He didn't know if he was ready. He decided readiness was a luxury he would have to do without. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We want to know what this story means to you. The morning was easier than the night, the way mornings usually are. He made oatmeal. He found the right sock. He walked Maya to the park before the heat came up and pushed her on the swings until she asked him to push her higher, and then laughed at the height she'd asked for. And he watched her face in the upswing and thought, this is what it is. In the beginning, Denise Carter had not been a person who needed to be understood so much as felt. She arrived in every room with energy that was not quite happiness and not quite performance, but something that lived in the territory between them. She lit spaces without seeming to try. She made people lean in without raising her voice. She had a quality of presence that made ordinary moments feel more significant than they probably were. Andre, who had spent his working life under cars and had a natural skepticism about anything that couldn't be inspected and diagnosed, had been disarmed by her before he knew he was disarming. They had met through a mutual friend at a cookout 5 years before Maya was born. Andre had been running the shop for 2 years by then, a small fleet repair operation out of a rented bay in a neighborhood where the parking lot smelled of hydraulic fluid, and the coffee at the diner next door had been the same strength since 1987. He fixed trucks, small commercial fleets, bakeries, catering companies, a landscaping operation with 8 vehicles that were perpetually in some state of distress. He was good at it in the way he was good at most things he paid attention to, which was thoroughly and without drama. Denise had walked over to where he was standing and said, "You look like the only person here who doesn't want to be interviewed." "I'm not interesting," he said. "That's interesting," she said. They were together for a year before they moved in together, and together for another 2 before Maya arrived. And for most of that time, the life they had built was small enough to carry and solid enough to stand on. He fixed trucks. She worked in marketing, cycling through contracts and campaigns with the restlessness of someone who had not yet found the work that fit the size of her ambition. They ate at the table most nights. They argued about dishes and almost nothing else. The change was gradual enough that it was hard to locate precisely when it started. Denise began working with tech startups in their 3rd year together, and the work put her in proximity to a different kind of money, the quick, demonstrative money of people who were 28 and had recently raised $12 million and liked to talk about scale. She began attending events in the evenings. She came home energized in a way that felt like the energy was pointed away from their apartment and towards something else. She began to look at Andre's shop with an expression that she probably didn't know she was making. Something between apology and impatience. She said, once standing in the kitchen, "Don't you want more than this?" "I want what we have," Andre said. "That's the problem," she said. "You always say that." She left when Maya was 4.5. Victor Langford had been in her periphery for 2 months. A startup founder with a logistics technology company, 37 years old, comfortable in rooms that required confidence, the kind of man who spoke in quarterly projections. Andre had known about him in the ambient way you know about things that are approaching. He had not confronted it because confrontation had never been his way, and because some part of him had understood that the leaving, when it came, was not about Victor. Victor was just the shape the leaving took. She stood in the apartment with her suitcase and said she needed something bigger. He asked her what she meant by bigger. She said she thought he knew. He looked at her for a long time. This woman he had loved carefully for 5 years and understood that she had already gone somewhere he couldn't follow, not because of distance, but because he didn't recognize the destination as somewhere worth going. "Are you leaving us?" he asked. Or just me? She said Maya would be fine. She said he was a wonderful father. She said this like both things were reasons, not apologies. Are you leaving us? He asked again. Or just me? She didn't answer. She picked up her suitcase and walked out, and the parking lot swallowed her, and he went to check on Maya. The years that followed are better understood as accumulation than as story. Andre accumulated expertise. He accumulated clients. He accumulated, slowly and by design, the infrastructure of a company that was large enough to matter but small enough, still, to run correctly. Maya was the axis around which everything else organized. He timed his day around her. Drop off at school by 7:50, which required him up at 5:30 to handle the morning work before the shop opened. Pick up at 3:15. Dinner by 6. Homework help until 7:30. Bedtime by 8:30. A rule he treated as inviolable because he had noticed that children who had consistent bedtimes moved through mornings with less friction, and he needed their mornings to have no friction at all. He had videos bookmarked on his phone for braiding techniques. He had watched perhaps 40 hours of these videos, practicing on a foam head he had purchased at a beauty supply store before Maya had deemed his braids acceptable. He counted this as a research project. Maya thought it was funny. She was not wrong that it was funny, but it was also necessary, and in his experience, most necessary things were a little funny if you looked at them right. On the question of Denise, he was careful. Maya asked about her mother in the way children ask about things they can't quite name, sideways, during car rides, at bedtime when the dark felt like permission. Where does she live now? Maya asked once. Somewhere nice, I think. Does she know where I live? She does. Maya processed this. Does she miss me? Andre kept his voice level. I think she does, he said. Adults get lost sometimes. It doesn't mean they stop loving the people they left behind. He was not certain this was true. He said it because Maya needed something to hold, and because he refused to put his own bitterness into a vessel his daughter would have to carry. Whatever he thought about Denise, and what he thought was complicated and private, and not for his daughter's understanding until she was old enough to carry it herself. He kept separate from the information he gave Maya about who she was and where she came from. The shop had been called Hayes Auto and Fleet Repair for 7 years when he brought in Leon Brooks. Leon was 26, a software engineer who had left a startup after a disagreement about ethics, and who had wandered into the shop one afternoon because his van was making a noise he couldn't diagnose. They had talked for an hour while Andre worked, and during that hour it became apparent that Leon had built a scheduling and diagnostics platform for small fleet operations as a side project, and that it was better than anything commercially available in the market at Andre's price point, and that Leon was not sure what to do with it. Lice it, Andre said. I tried. Nobody thought the market was big enough. How big is the market? Every city has at least 400 small commercial fleet operators. Most of them are managing maintenance manually, losing about 18 to 22% of fleet availability to unscheduled downtime. Andre considered this. He was under a van, and he set down his wrench, and he thought about the 18%. 18% of fleet unavailability across 400 operators in a city meant trucks not running, orders not filled, people not fed. That was not a small market. That was a city's circulatory system experiencing intermittent blockages. Tell me about the platform, he said. 3 months later, Hayes Mobility Partners was incorporated, with Leon as the technology director and Andre as the operational lead. They started with 12 clients, all former customers of the original shop. Within a year, they had 40. Within 3 years, they were in 4 cities. Andre did not move to a bigger office. He did not lease a different car. He kept the shop running because the shop was where he understood the actual work. The physical reality of machines that needed maintenance and mechanics who needed employment. And he didn't trust himself to run the company correctly if he lost that connection to the ground level of it. Uncle Raymond, who had driven long-haul routes for 3 decades and was the person who had given Andre his first loan, $4,000 in 1997, repaid in 14 months, stopped by the shop occasionally to drink coffee and supervise from a lawn chair. Boy, Raymond said one afternoon, watching Leon demonstrate the platform interface on a laptop. You know what real power is? Tell me, Andre said. Real power is when people depend on what you built before they know your name. He took a sip of coffee. You almost there. Andre thought about this. He thought about the bakery fleet and the landscaping operation and the 47 fleet operators in 3 cities whose morning logistics ran through software Leon had built and Andre had helped fund. He thought about his name not being on any of it except inside a filing cabinet. Good, he said. Maya was 7 when she found Leon's business card on the kitchen counter and asked what Hayes Mobility Partners was. "It's work," Andre said. "But it has your name." "Yes. Is it like the shop?" "The shop fixes vehicles. This helps people manage the vehicles after they're fixed." Maya thought about it. "So you have 2 jobs?" "1 job. 2 parts." She accepted this with the equanimity of a 7-year-old who had more pressing concerns and went back to her drawing. Andre watched her for a moment, this daughter who had his stillness, and it was becoming apparent, her mother's ability to make a room feel inhabited. He went back to work. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, which was how it had been described in the calendar invite that came through his assistant. A funding review meeting with Langford Mobility Systems, an emerging logistics technology company seeking bridge financing to reach their next revenue milestone. The meeting summary described their platform, their client acquisition rate, and their capital requirements. $2.5 million, which would cover 6 months of runway and allow the company to reach a profitability threshold they projected with apparent confidence. Andre had reviewed the summary and passed it to his investment analyst, a woman named Carolyn, who had a talent for identifying the difference between projections based on data and projections based on optimism. Carolyn had sent him a single line. "The client acquisition rate doesn't support the burn rate. Recommend deep review before proceeding." He had scheduled the deep review as part of the meeting. He arrived at the conference room on the 37th floor of the Commerce Tower at 11:15. The room had floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, the city arranged below like a map of its own ambitions. His team was already seated. The Langford team was already seated across from them. He walked in and sat down, and Denise Carter, now listed in the meeting materials as Denise Langford, marketing director, looked up from her conference materials, and her face did something he recognized. He had seen it on her face during arguments in the apartment, in the specific moment when she realized she had made an error she could not unmake. Calculation, then recalculation, then the recognition that the new calculation didn't help. Victor Langford, beside her, had not yet understood what he was looking at. He was a tall man with the face of someone who had been told he was impressive often enough to have internalized it fully. He stood, extended his hand, introduced himself as the founder and CEO of Langford Mobility, and asked Andre if they had a chance to review the deck. "We reviewed it," Andre said. "That's why we're here." Victor launched into his presentation with the smooth, preloaded confidence of a man who had delivered it many times. Market opportunity, platform differentiation, client pipeline, growth trajectory. The words were correct, and the slides were well designed, and the numbers were arranged in a way that looked, at first glance, compelling. At second glance, they were a different matter. Carolyn asked the first technical question about the client acquisition cost versus the claimed pipeline value. Victor deflected with a slide about market timing. She asked again more specifically. He offered a projection. She produced the underlying numbers she had pulled from their disclosure and asked him to explain the gap. Victor produced a phrase about market conditions. Carolyn looked at her notes. During all of this, Denise was very still. She had positioned herself slightly back from Victor, and she was looking at the table, or at the window, or at some point that was not Andre. Andre watched her when he wasn't watching Victor, not with hostility, but with the attention of someone who was reading a situation and needed all of the information. The presentation ran for 40 minutes. Victor closed it with an invitation for questions. Andre had 2. "Your platform claims to reduce fleet downtime by 24%. What's your methodology for that claim?" Victor cited a case study. Andre asked for the underlying data. Victor said it was proprietary. Andre said they would need to see it before proceeding with any commitment. The second question he addressed to both of them. "The marketing director. We have you as Denise Langford. Previously, Denise Carter." Denise looked up. "We've met," Andre said. Victor turned to look at her. Denise said quietly, "We have." "How long ago?" Victor said. "A long time," Denise said. She was watching Andre. "He's Maya's father." The room absorbed this. Victor said, "So this is personal." "She used to be," Andre said, looking at Victor. "The meeting is professional." Reek requested a recess. The 2 teams separated into adjacent conference rooms. In the outer room, Carolyn placed the full financial analysis on the table. The discrepancy between the reported client acquisition cost and the actual figures in the disclosure. The overlap between the consulting account and the investor capital account. The signature on the transfer documents. "This isn't underfunding," Carolyn said. "This is misrepresentation." Andre nodded. He sat with that for a moment. He thought about Maya in her school uniform. He thought about a Thursday afternoon in a parking lot. He thought about what he had said to his daughter about adults who get lost. Then he thought about the 34 employees of Langford Mobility Systems, who had come to work that morning without knowing that their company's funding situation was materially different from what they'd been told. He went back into the conference room. "We won't be providing the capital as structured," he said. Victor started to speak. Andre continued. "However, we will consider a restructured engagement. Under those terms, Victor, you would step down from the operational role pending an independent audit. The existing capital would be ring-fenced for payroll and core vendor obligations. The platform, if the underlying technology holds up and we need to verify that, would be assessed for acquisition at a fair market valuation." Victor's voice went up. He said this was a unilateral power play. He said Andre was using his personal history with Denise to conduct a professional attack. He said the terms were punitive. Andre waited. "The methodology you cited for the 24% downtime reduction doesn't exist in your data," he said. "That's not personal. That's the reason we're here." He looked at Denise. "The employees in your company, the ones not in this room, they came to work today. They're answering emails. They have families. What happens to them isn't abstract." He paused. "I know what it feels like to hold someone else's mess." Denise looked at him for the first time without calculation. "The investor capital and the consulting account," she said quietly. "Did you have all of that before you came into the room?" "Carolyn had it," Andre said. "She absorbed this." Then she turned to Victor and asked, in a voice that had lost its professional coding, "Did you move investor money into the consulting account?" Victor said it was more complicated than that framing suggested. The silence that followed was the answer. 3 weeks later, following the independent audit, Langford Mobility Systems underwent a structured dissolution. Victor resigned as part of a legal agreement that included repayment obligations. The core platform technology was acquired by Hayes Mobility Partners at a valuation that reflected its actual merits, which were real, if more modest than advertised. 14 of the company's employees were retained under the new structure. Andre walked through Victor's former office on a Tuesday morning. A woman at a desk near the window was packing personal items from her workstation, her movements careful and controlled. "We thought no one was coming," she said. "I know what that feels like," Andre said. He found Denise outside the building after the signing, standing on the sidewalk in the afternoon light. She was not wearing the professional armor she had worn in the conference room. She had a coat on and a bag, and the look of someone who had arrived somewhere they had not planned to arrive. "I have to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "Do you hate me?" He thought about the parking lot. He thought about Maya's sock. He thought about Leon's business card on the kitchen counter and the 7 years of mornings between that Thursday and this Tuesday. "No," he said. "But I stopped carrying the version of you I used to defend." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face that was not relief and not grief, but something in the vicinity of both. "She asked me if I forgot her," Denise said. "Maya. She said it when she was 6. I heard it from a friend of yours." Andre looked at her steadily. "And? I didn't forget her, I just—" She stopped. "I was afraid of who I was when I was with her. When I was with both of you. You were a mother," he said. "That was who you were. I know that now. Knowing it now is a start," he said. "It's not enough." He told her what he needed. Consistent contact with Maya, arranged through him, without Victor in proximity. He told her there were no shortcuts, no grand gestures, no moment of declaration that would replace 7 years of ordinary presence. He told her Maya asked about her sometimes, and that the asking was the thing to respond to, not the news cycle of a lost business deal. Denise said she understood. He was not certain she did. He was not certain she didn't. He would observe. The school auditorium was not large, but it held 200 people easily, and on the evening of Maya's third-grade performance, it was full. Andre sat in the third row on the left. Uncle Raymond was beside him, 80 years old, and wearing a hat that belonged to a different era, which he wore with the confidence of a man who had outlasted everyone's opinions about his fashion. Denise sat in the back. She had arrived early and chosen the back on her own, and Andre noticed this, and noticed that she was watching the stage with an expression that was not performing. Maya came out in the second group. She played a recorder with the focused seriousness of a child who had practiced until the song felt safe. She did not look for her father in the audience the way some children did. She had learned, early, that he was always where he said he was, so she did not need to confirm it. After the performance, in the lobby, Denise came over. Maya looked at her. Denise crouched down to Maya's eye level without prompting. "You were really good," Denise said. "That takes practice." "I know," Maya said. Denise looked at her steadily. "I've been trying to find a better way to be here," she said. "It's taking me longer than it should." Maya considered her. Okay, she said, and then moved toward Andre and put her hand in his. They walked out together, the three of them in the same space without architecture between them for the first time in years. Andre looked at Denise once, over Maya's head, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything, because what could be said had already been said, and what was left required only time and consistency, neither of which were things you could speak. You really did build it, Denise said at last as they reached the parking lot. Andre looked at Maya, who was telling Uncle Raymond something about the recorder section's performance with the evaluative authority of a person who had strong technical opinions. I had to, he said. She was watching. The training center opened 8 months later in a warehouse that had been a textile facility, then a storage unit, then nothing for 15 years. Andre had bought the building 2 years before with that specific use in mind, and the renovation had taken 8 months and the labor of 11 contractors, 3 of whom had trained in Hayes Mobility Partners' operational division and were doing this work at a discounted rate as a form of reciprocity. On the wall of the main workshop, in steel letters, was a sentence Uncle Raymond had said once and never repeated, assuming it needed saying only once. Real power is what still works when nobody is clapping. Andre brought Maya on the opening day. She was 8 now, with her father's stillness and her mother's presence, and she walked through the space with a combination of observation and evaluation that made Andre think she would be good at something complicated when she grew old enough to choose. She stopped in front of the main work floor where 3 instructors were setting up equipment and looked for a long time. "Dad," she said, "is this what Mom meant by future?" He looked at the workshop, at the instructors, at the workbenches and the diagnostic equipment and the door that was propped open to let the October air come through. "No," he said. "This is what I meant." That night, walking back to the car, Maya put her hand in his. She was 8, and hands in father's hands were still natural at 8, and he knew this would not always be the case, which made the naturalness of it more rather than less significant. "Were you sad when Mom left?" she asked. He had been waiting for this question for 4 years or something like it. "Yes," he said. "What did you do?" He thought about the sock, the swing, the 40 hours of braiding videos, the 6 a.m. mornings, the lease on the first shop bay and the cashier's check for the building, and the year he had no one to call when he was sick and still had to manage the school drop-off. He looked back at the training center, its windows lit from inside, the instructors visible in the warm yellow light through the glass. "I got up the next morning," he said. There are people who confuse the absence of noise for the absence of substance. They see a man who does not announce himself and read the silence as limitation. They see a shop with a worn sign and read it as the ceiling of what's possible. They see oil on someone's hands and see only where those hands have been, not what they have built. Denise Carter was not a bad person. She was a person who did not yet know what she was looking for, and who made the mistake of assuming that loudness and speed and the performance of ambition were the things she was looking for. She found them, briefly, in a man who had all 3. She discovered in the way that such discoveries are made that the performance of a thing is not the same as the thing. What she had left in a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon was a man who was already building, slowly, in the mornings before the world watched, in the evenings after Maya was asleep. She had read the building materials as inadequacy and thrown them away. And the man who had collected them from the sidewalk, who had carried them back inside without a word, who had spent 7 years turning them into something real, that man was not waiting for her apology to know his own worth, and he had known it all along. He just hadn't had anyone to say it to. He got up the next morning, and the one after that, and the one after that, and that was enough.